The elevator doors slid open on the 37th floor, and I stepped into what felt like walking onto the set of a power fantasy. Marble floors gleamed under crystal chandeliers, and floor-to-ceiling windows offered a view of the city that probably cost more than most people's houses. I clutched my portfolio tighter, reminding myself why I was here. 3 months of unpaid invoices. 3 months of polite emails that went unanswered. 3 months of watching my small translation business hemorrhage money, while a billionaire played games with my livelihood. The receptionist, a woman who looked like she'd been carved from the same marble as the floors, barely glanced up as I approached. Her nameplate read, Victoria, in gold lettering that probably cost more than my monthly rent. "I'm here to see Mr. Al-Rashid," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Do you have an appointment?" The question dripped with the kind of condescension that suggested she already knew the answer. "No, but I've been trying to schedule one for 3 months. I'm Sarah Martinez from Linguistic Solutions. We provided translation services for his Dubai expansion project." Victoria's fingers danced across her keyboard with theatrical precision. "I'm sorry, but Mr. Al-Rashid is extremely busy today. Perhaps you could email his assistant?" The same assistant who'd been ignoring my emails for 3 months. The same assistant who'd suddenly become unreachable the moment our final invoice was submitted. I'd played this game before, but never with stakes this high. "I'll wait," I said, settling into one of the leather chairs that probably cost more than my car. Victoria's smile could have frozen champagne. "He has back-to-back meetings until 6, and then he's flying to Dubai tonight. Perhaps next week?" Next week. Always next week. The eternal carrot dangling just out of reach, while my business circled the drain. I opened my portfolio and pulled out the contract, signed and notarized, with payment terms clearly stated in both English and Arabic. 30 days net. It had been 90. "I'll wait," I repeated, and something in my tone must have registered because Victoria's smile flickered slightly. The waiting area became my battlefield for the next 4 hours. I watched executives glide past in $1,000 suits, speaking in hushed tones about deals that would reshape markets. Victoria made increasingly obvious phone calls about security and protocol violations. At 5:45, a man emerged from the corner office that dominated the floor. Khalid Al-Rashid looked exactly like his Forbes photos. Tall, impeccably dressed, with silver threading through his dark hair and eyes that had probably closed more deals than most people had hot meals. He was speaking rapidly in Arabic into his phone, and even from across the room I could tell he was furious about something. His voice carried the particular timbre of a man accustomed to being obeyed without question. He swept toward the elevator bank without acknowledging anyone's existence, his assistant scrambling to keep up while juggling 2 phones and what looked like boarding passes. This was it. My one chance before he disappeared to Dubai and left me with another month of unanswered calls. I stood up, my legs slightly numb from the marathon wait, and walked directly into his path. "Mr. Al-Rashid?" He didn't stop walking, didn't even slow down. His assistant, a nervous young man with sweat stains, despite the Arctic air conditioning, tried to wave me off. "I'm Sarah Martinez from Linguistic Solutions. We need to discuss the outstanding payment for your Dubai project." Still no acknowledgement. He continued his phone conversation, speaking rapidly in what sounded like he was dressing down someone on the other end. His pace never wavered as he approached the elevator. The assistant hit the call button repeatedly, as if that might summon the elevator faster and end this embarrassing encounter. This was the moment that would define everything. I could retreat, apologize for the interruption, and go home to explain to my team why their paychecks would be delayed again. Or I could do what every instinct told me was either brilliant or career suicide. "I hear you're a man who honors his business commitments," I said, my voice carrying clearly across the marble expanse. The effect was immediate and electric. Khalid Al-Rashid stopped so abruptly that his assistant nearly collided with his back. The phone call ended mid-sentence. Slowly, deliberately, he turned to face me, and I found myself looking into eyes that held genuine surprise, mixed with something that might have been respect. Or calculation. With men like this, it was often hard to tell the difference. You speak Arabic? He asked. Fluently, yes. And I also understand when someone tries to ignore their obligations. The elevator arrived with a soft chime, but he made no move toward it. The other executives who'd been waiting stepped inside, shooting curious glances at this unexpected standoff. Victoria had risen from her desk, clearly unsure whether to intervene or call security. Khalid's assistant looked like he wanted to disappear entirely. Walk with me, Khalid said in English, but his tone had completely changed. Gone was the dismissive authority. This was a man reassessing a situation that had just become infinitely more complex. We moved toward his office, and I could feel every eye in the reception area tracking our movement. This wasn't how these encounters usually played out, and everyone knew it. His office was a monument to success. Awards, photos with world leaders, artifacts from across the Middle East displayed with museum-quality lighting. But what struck me most was how it felt like a room designed to intimidate, every element carefully chosen to remind visitors of their place in the hierarchy. He gestured to a chair across from his massive desk, but I remained standing. Something told me that sitting down would shift the dynamic back in his favor, and I'd fought too hard to get this far. You worked on my Dubai expansion, he said, settling behind his desk like a king assuming his throne. The legal documents, the marketing materials, the employee handbook. 3 months of intensive work. 93 days, I corrected, and 93 days since we submitted our final invoice, which was 30 days past due 2 months ago. He opened a laptop and began typing, probably pulling up my file. Your Arabic is quite good. Where did you learn? It was a test, a way to probe for weaknesses or inconsistencies. University of California, Berkeley. 4 years of formal study, followed by 18 months living in Jordan and Syria before the war. Then another 2 years in Morocco, working with NGOs on refugee assistance programs. Each credential was a small victory, building credibility in a world where credibility was currency. Impressive. He leaned back in his chair, steepling his fingers. But you understand, of course, that business is more complex than simple language translation. There are relationships to consider, protocols to follow. And there are also contracts to honor and bills to pay. I pulled out the signed agreement and placed it on his desk. This isn't a relationship issue, Mr. Al-Rashid. This is a legal obligation. He glanced at the contract but didn't pick it up. You're very direct for an American. And you're very evasive for someone who built an empire on trust and reputation. The words hung in the air like a challenge. I'd crossed a line, and we both knew it. But sometimes crossing lines was the only way to move forward. For a long moment, he said nothing. Then, surprisingly, he laughed, a genuine sound that transformed his entire demeanor. You know, in 3 decades of business, very few people have had the audacity to corner me in my own office and lecture me in Arabic about my obligations. Maybe that's because most people don't speak Arabic. Or maybe it's because most people can afford to wait indefinitely for payment. He stood up and walked to the window, hands clasped behind his back. From this height, the city looked like a collection of toys, and I wondered if that's how he saw the world, as something to be arranged and rearranged at will. Tell me about your business, he said without turning around. How many employees do you have? 12 full-time translators and interpreters, plus myself. We specialize in Arabic, Persian, and Urdu for corporate clients entering Middle Eastern markets. And without this payment? 3 people have already given notice. 2 more are looking for other work. The rest are waiting to see if I can pull a miracle out of thin air. Now he did turn around, and his expression had shifted again. What made you think confronting me like this would work? Because I researched you. Your father started with nothing in Beirut and built a textile empire through honesty and hard work. Your first big break came when a German manufacturer trusted you with a contract because you learned enough German to negotiate directly instead of through intermediaries. You've always valued people who take the initiative to bridge cultural gaps. He returned to his desk and, for the first time, actually picked up the contract. As he read, I watched his face carefully. This was either going to work spectacularly or fail catastrophically, and I'd know which within the next few minutes. The work your team provided was exceptional, he said finally. The cultural nuances in the marketing materials probably saved us from several embarrassing mistakes. And your legal translations were more accurate than what we got from the Dubai firm we'd used previously. Then why haven't you paid us? Because paying bills immediately makes you look desperate. Because delayed payment is a cash flow management strategy. Because in this business, maintaining leverage is often more valuable than maintaining friendships. The honesty was startling and infuriating in equal measure. And because you assumed a small company run by a young woman wouldn't have the resources or courage to call you on it. That too, he admitted without a trace of shame. I felt my anger building but channeled it into cold determination. So this is just a game to you? My employees, livelihoods, my business that I've spent 5 years building. It's all just a cash flow strategy? Business is always a game, Miss Martinez. The question is whether you know the rules well enough to play effectively. He opened his desk drawer and pulled out a checkbook. But I must admit, your approach today demonstrates a level of strategic thinking I didn't expect. He began writing, and I found myself holding my breath. Here's what I'm going to offer you, he said, tearing off the check and placing it face down on the desk. Full payment for your services, plus a 20% bonus for the inconvenience. But I want to discuss a longer-term arrangement. I reached for the check, but he placed his hand over it. First, let's talk about expansion. My company is moving into 3 new markets this year: Egypt, Morocco, and the UAE. I need a translation partner who understands not just language, but culture. Someone who can anticipate problems before they become embarrassments. And you think after playing games with our payment for 3 months I'd want to work with you again? I think you're a businesswoman who recognizes opportunity when it presents itself. And I think you're smart enough to know that holding grudges is expensive. He lifted his hand from the check and I picked it up. The amount was exactly what he'd promised. Full payment plus 20%. But more than the money, it was what the check represented. Acknowledgement, respect, and the leverage that came with both. What kind of longer-term arrangement? I asked, though I was already mentally calculating how this could transform my business. Exclusive translation services for all Middle Eastern expansion projects. Guaranteed minimum billings of $2 million annually. 30-day payment terms, no exceptions. $2 million. It was more than my company had made in its entire 5-year existence. It was the kind of contract that would let me hire the best translators, open a proper office, maybe even expand into other languages. It was also a golden cage that would make me entirely dependent on the whims of a man who'd just demonstrated his willingness to play power games with people's livelihoods. I need guarantees, I said. Contract terms that can't be changed unilaterally. Penalty clauses for late payments. And I want everything reviewed by my attorney before I sign anything. Of course, I wouldn't expect anything less from someone who just cornered me in my own office. He stood up and extended his hand. Should we discuss the details over dinner? I know an excellent Lebanese restaurant that stays open late. I looked at his outstretched hand, then at the check in mine. 3 months ago, I'd been a small business owner struggling to get paid for work already completed. Now I was being offered a partnership that could change everything. But partnerships with men like Khalid al-Rashid came with complications that extended far beyond simple business transactions. Mr. al-Rashid, I said, not taking his hand yet, I need to understand something. Is this offer genuine or is it another game? Because I won't put my employees through this kind of uncertainty again. Miss Martinez, he replied, his tone serious. I've built a $5 billion empire by recognizing talent and determination when I see it. What you did today, learning Arabic, researching my background, having the courage to confront me directly, that's exactly the kind of strategic thinking I need on my team. But you tested me first, put me through 3 months of hell to see how I'd respond. I test everyone. It's how I separate people who want success from people who will fight for it. You passed. I thought about my employees waiting to hear whether they still had jobs. I thought about the other small businesses that probably weren't lucky enough to have someone who spoke Arabic and was desperate enough to stage an office ambush. I thought about the power dynamics that would define any long-term relationship with someone who viewed business as warfare by other means. And then I shook his hand. Dinner sounds fine. But we're splitting the check, and I'm driving myself. This is a business discussion, not a date. He laughed again, the same genuine sound that had surprised me earlier. I wouldn't dream of suggesting otherwise. Though I should warn you, the restaurant I have in mind serves the best lamb tagine outside of Casablanca. It might spoil you for American Middle Eastern food forever. Mr. Al-Rashid, after the day I've had, I think I can handle a little culinary spoiling. As we left his office together, I caught Victoria's expression of pure bewilderment. The young woman who'd waited 4 hours for an audience was now walking out as an invited dinner guest. Sometimes the best victories were the ones that left everyone else trying to figure out what the hell had just happened. The elevator ride down was filled with comfortable silence. When we reached the lobby, Khalid turned to me with an expression I couldn't quite read. "One more question, if you don't mind. What made you so certain that speaking Arabic would get my attention?" I smiled, thinking of all the research I'd done, all the articles I'd read about his business philosophy and family background. Because powerful men like you are used to people approaching you with deference and desperation. They come begging, offering discounts, apologizing for bothering you. But nobody ever approaches you as an equal, speaking your language, holding you accountable for their own stated principles. And you thought that would work? I thought it was the only thing that might work. Everything else had failed. We emerged onto the sidewalk where his driver waited with a black Mercedes that probably cost more than my annual salary. But I walked to my own car, a 7-year-old Honda that had gotten me through every challenge of the past 5 years. "I'll meet you at the restaurant," I called over my shoulder. "And Mr. Al-Rashid? Next time you want to test someone's character, maybe try a method that doesn't involve putting their employees' livelihoods at risk." He nodded slowly. "Noted. Though something tells me there won't be a next time, I have a feeling you and I understand each other perfectly now." As I drove through the city toward what I hoped would be the beginning of a new chapter, I reflected on the strange turns life can take. This morning I'd been a desperate small business owner facing potential bankruptcy. Tonight I was heading to dinner with a billionaire who might just become the key to everything I'd been working toward. The check was safely tucked in my purse, but more valuable than the money was the knowledge that sometimes the biggest risks yield the biggest rewards. Sometimes speaking someone's language means more than just knowing the words. And sometimes the only way to get a powerful person's attention is to remind them that their power comes with responsibilities they can't simply ignore. The Lebanese restaurant was in a part of town I rarely visited, where the buildings were older and the streets had character that the gleaming financial district lacked. I pulled up just as Khalid's Mercedes arrived, and we walked in together. The owner, an elderly man with kind eyes and weathered hands, greeted Khalid in Arabic like an old friend. He spoke for several minutes about family, about changes in the neighborhood, about the subtle art of preparing perfect hummus. It was a side of the billionaire I hadn't expected to see. Genuine warmth, cultural connection, the kind of easy familiarity that money couldn't buy. We were seated at a corner table where the lighting was soft, and the conversations around us created a comfortable buzz of privacy. The menu was entirely in both Arabic and English, which I realized was probably another small test. I ordered confidently, selecting dishes I genuinely wanted rather than trying to impress anyone. So Khalid said once our wine had arrived, "Tell me about the moment you decided to learn Arabic." Most Americans who study it are either academics or government employees. You're neither. I was 19 and arrogant, I said, taking a sip of what turned out to be an excellent Lebanese red wine. I'd grown up in Southern California, surrounded by Spanish speakers, and I thought that made me some kind of linguistic expert. Then I took an Introduction to Middle Eastern Studies course and realized how little I knew about the world. What changed your mind about business versus academia? Reality. PhD programs take forever, pay nothing, and mostly prepare you to teach other people who will also become academics. I wanted to build something, to solve real problems. When I saw how many American companies were making expensive mistakes in Middle Eastern markets simply because they didn't understand the culture, I realized there was an opportunity. The lamb tagine, when it arrived, was everything he'd promised. Rich, complex flavors that spoke of centuries of culinary tradition. We ate and talked about everything except business. My time in Jordan, his childhood in Lebanon, the ways language shapes thought, the challenge of maintaining cultural identity while building global businesses. You know, he said as we were finishing dinner, Very few people surprise me anymore. When you reach a certain level of success, most interactions become predictable. People want something, they flatter you, they make promises, they hope you'll forget the details later. And I didn't do any of those things. You did the opposite. You held me accountable, spoke to me as an equal, and made it clear that you knew exactly what I was doing and why. It was refreshing. It was desperate, I corrected. But I'm glad it worked. He leaned back in his chair, studying me with the same calculating expression I'd seen in his office. The offer I made earlier was genuine. But I want you to understand what you'd be getting into. My company operates in complicated markets with complicated politics. We compete against people who don't always play by Western rules. Success requires not just skill but resilience. Are you trying to scare me off? I'm trying to make sure you know what you're signing up for. Because once we shake hands on this partnership, I'll expect the same level of commitment from you that I give to everything I do. Total dedication, exceptional results, no excuses. I thought about my team, about the employees who'd stuck with me through lean times and uncertainty. I thought about the opportunities this partnership could create, not just for me, but for every translator and cultural consultant who'd ever struggled to build a sustainable business in this field. Mr. Al-Rashid, I've spent 5 years building a company from nothing while competing against established firms with better connections and bigger budgets. I've learned Arabic well enough to negotiate in it, studied cultural nuances, until I could anticipate problems my clients didn't even know they had, and just spent 4 hours in your waiting room, followed by a confrontation that could have ended my career. I think I can handle complicated. Then we have a deal? We have a deal. But I want those contracts reviewed by my attorney, and I want the first quarter's payment schedule in writing, before I commit my team to any new projects. Done. He raised his wine glass. To successful partnerships and the courage to pursue them. To getting paid on time and the dignity that comes with it. We clinked glasses, and I realized that this moment would probably define the next phase of my career. Whether it would be the best decision I'd ever made, or the most complicated remained to be seen. But as we finished our wine and talked about implementation timelines and project specifications, I felt something I hadn't experienced in months. Optimism backed by genuine opportunity. The evening ended with handshakes rather than hugs, business cards rather than personal numbers. Professional respect rather than personal chemistry, which was exactly how I preferred to keep things. As I drove home through streets that looked different somehow, brighter with possibility, I reflected on the strange alchemy that had transformed a desperate confrontation into a career-defining opportunity. Sometimes the biggest changes come from the smallest moments of courage. Sometimes speaking someone's language means more than just vocabulary and grammar. And sometimes the most important business skill isn't negotiation or strategy, but simply the willingness to stand up and say what needs to be said, regardless of who's listening or what the consequences might be. My phone buzzed with a text from my business partner. How did it go? Should we start updating resumes? I replied, start planning expansion. We just got the contract that changes everything. Tomorrow would bring lawyers and contracts and all the complicated details of turning a handshake deal into binding legal reality. But tonight, I drove home with a check that would cover 3 months of back salaries and the knowledge that sometimes the biggest risks really do yield the biggest rewards. The game had changed. The players had changed. And for the first time in months, I was looking forward to finding out what came next.